The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, welcome everyone.
Hey, for those of you who don't know, Beth's birthday was Friday.
It was.
Gotta say, she's still in her 40s for another year.
Yay. Thank you for bringing that up, because I'm handling it very, very well.
Well, you really didn't seem to be during the week.
Handling it well?
Yeah, you were kind of bummed out about it.
You didn't catch the sarcasm in my voice just then?
Yeah, I did a little bit, yeah.
But I did have an entire weekend of birthday celebrating, which was really kind of nice.
Yeah, we had a blast this weekend.
Yeah, so thank you for that, because you made it special for me.
I made you forget all about it, didn't I?
Well, yeah, until you brought it up every once in a while.
But I got you a great card to remind you.
You did get me a great card. It's one of my favorites.
And since we're in such a good mood from this weekend, we're not going to do any housekeeping.
Yeah, we only do housekeeping when we're in a bad mood.
So I think we'll just get right into our stories tonight.
All right. Well, why don't you get us started first? Because
Okay.
I'm excited about your story. It's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
At 11 p.m. on the hot and humid night of August 21st, 1955, two cars carrying 8 adults and 3 children from the Sutton family screeched into the parking lot of the Hopkinsville, Kentucky police station. As the 11 people rushed into the station, the officer on duty could see that all of them were terrified. "We need help," one of the adults cried. "We've been fighting them for nearly 4 hours." As the police officer tried to make sense of what had happened, had the Sutton family home been broken into? Were there weapons involved? Was the family under some sort of attack? The officer was stymied by the response, yes, yes, and yes, but not by humans. Their farmhouse had been invaded by aliens. Although skeptical, the officer did note that one of the men's blood pressure measured 140 beats per minute, indicating that he was certainly scared of something. And since the Suttons had admitted that they had shot at these creatures, the officer was concerned that they were unknowingly shooting at their own neighbors, so he dispatched 4 city police officers to the farm. They were joined by 5 state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police officers from nearby Fort Campbell. So maybe the officer did worry that the Suttons were telling the truth. Now, none of the officers claimed to find anything unusual at the unpainted 3-room house, except evidence that someone had shot their guns through several of the windows and door screens from the inside. And yet, the Sutton family's story of their encounter with aliens has become the stuff of legend, in part due to the media blowing up facts and hyping the details until it became something it wasn't. But what it really was is still up for debate, and just might be one of the weirdest and most disturbing alien encounter stories in U.S. history. Elmer Lucky Sutton worked for a traveling carnival during the summer of 1955, and while on break, he and his young wife Vera decided to stop by Lucky's mom's house in Kelly, a town that was about 8 miles from Hopkinsville. Lucky and Vera had brought along some co-worker friends of theirs, Billy Ray and June Taylor. When the foursome arrived at Lucky's mom's house, he discovered that the house was already full. His mom, Glennie Linkford, was hosting a family get-together of sorts. There were his 3 half-siblings, Lonnie, Charlton, and Mary, plus Lucky's brother, J.C. J.C.'s wife, Arlene, was there, as well as her brother, O.P. Baker. The group had a great time. Glennie made dinner for them all, and afterwards they settled in for a card game. The farmhouse did not have a telephone or a radio, so it was just the group of 11 having a good time entertaining themselves. But the house also didn't have running water, so around 7 p.m., Billy Ray Taylor left the house to get some water from the backyard well. Glennie did not allow alcohol in the house, by the way, so none of the adults had been drinking. According to countryliving.com, Billy Ray returned to the house after just a few minutes with his glass refilled, and he sat back down to resume the card game. Except Billy Ray seemed a little agitated. Finally, he blurted out that he had just seen something kind of weird. A shining silver disc had flown silently over them, and he said, quote, "real bright with an exhaust all the colors of the rainbow," end quote. It passed over the house, hovered in midair, and then seemed to drop straight to the ground. Since Billy Ray was known as a prankster, everyone laughed it off, but Billy Ray was visibly shaken. They all suggested it was a meteor or a shooting star, and when Billy Ray insisted that it wasn't, they kind of all just laughed at it again. Agitated, Billy Ray insisted that he had seen a UFO, and when he asked his wife June if she believed him, the table erupted into laughter again. According to History.com, an hour passed when the family dog started barking incessantly outside. Billy Ray insisted it was because of the UFO, and he convinced Lucky to go back out to the well with him and check it out. As the 2 young men walked to the well, Billy Ray pointed out the trajectory of what he had seen. There was nothing to be seen now, of course, and the friends started walking back towards the house. Suddenly, from the woods behind the house, they could see a strange glow. As they stood there, wondering what it was, they both saw what they described as a small humanoid figure walking towards them. They said it was about 3.5 feet tall, with an almost perfectly round, oversized head. Its arms almost touched the ground, and its hands ended in talon-like fingers. Its long legs didn't seem to be walking on the ground. It floated rather than walked. And its eyes seemed to glow with a yellowish light. Its entire body shimmered as if it were made of silver metal, and as it walked towards them, it raised its arms as if it was surrendering. As the men backed up towards the rear of the house, the creature kept walking towards them. Terrified, they each entered the house, grabbed a nearby 20-gauge shotgun and a .22 rifle, and stepped back outside. They both fired and hit the creature, but instead of falling to the ground, it seemed to do a little backwards flip before it jumped to its feet and disappeared. Yelling profanities, the 2 men hightailed it back into the house and slammed the door, locking it behind them. Within seconds, another creature, or perhaps the same one, peered through an open window. One of the men fired at it, blowing a hole through the window screen. It too flipped over and poofed right out of sight.
I love this story.
It's an excellent one.
It's one of my favorites.
50-year-old Glennie was annoyed by Billy Ray's prank at this point, which is all she suspected that it was. She hadn't seen anything and wanted the 2 boys to quit their caterwauling about, quote, otherworldly goblins. She was more worried that the men would truly end up scaring the children, so she sent the 3 younger ones to bed. But at this point, Lucky was standing guard at the front door with a 12-gauge shotgun, and Billy Ray was posted at the back with a .22 rifle. Beyond annoyed now, she crouched down next to Billy Ray in the hallway, trying to reason with him into giving up on his prank that had gone way too far. But before long, a 3-foot-tall creature stepped out of the darkness and peered in through the back door. She described it as, quote, a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. It was a shimmering bright metal like on my refrigerator, end quote. Thinking that it was some sort of demon, Glennie screamed, and Billy Ray fired his gun, blasting another hole right through the back screen door. Billy Ray stepped out onto the back porch, and another creature had to have been perched on the roof because it reached down and grabbed at his hair with a taloned hand. At this point, Arlene Sutton grabbed Billy Ray's arm and yanked him back inside the house. From the front door, Lucky stepped out into the yard and took aim at the roof, shooting yet another creature. It rolled off the roof, completely unharmed, and ran off towards the woods. It wasn't clear to any of the people in the house whether they were just fighting off one creature or 3 or 4, but by now, all the men were armed and ready to defend their home. JC took aim with a 20-gauge shotgun and shot a creature right through the closed living room window as it peered in at them, blasting a hole through the glass. Billy Ray took a second shot, hitting it for a second time. Again, the creature seemed to somersault or flip backwards, and then it just took off running. The 3 younger children were wide awake, of course, and Glennie tried to reassure them that God would protect them from the devil's minions that were attacking her house. The women and children all hid in the back room of the house, except for Glennie. She wanted another look at these demonic creatures. She stayed safely inside, though, with JP and OP, while Lucky and Billy Ray patrolled outside. Someone yelled out to look into the maple tree, and sure enough, perched in the branches, was yet another silver-colored little man. As both Lucky and Billy Ray fired at it, it clinked as though their bullets were hitting metal. Completely unharmed, the alien just floated away. Inside the house, the women had a million questions. Were the creatures outside demons, goblins, or aliens? Why did they keep raising their arms as if they were surrendering, but then keep trying to get into the house? And most importantly of all, why didn't bullets kill them? Somebody realized that if these creatures got too close to any light, they backed off. So thinking fast, they turned on every single light inside the house. Outside, it became eerily silent. Maybe the creature or creatures had left and gone back to their spaceship. But no, in the silence, everyone heard the horrible sound of scratching from above their heads. There was at least one creature still up on the rooftop. Lucky darted outside, aimed at the roof, and fired. The goblin or alien or whatever it was just simply floated down to the ground and ran off into the trees. And that's when all 11 people ran for the trucks parked out front and drove like hell to the Hopkinsville police station. Now, like I said earlier, initially the police officer on duty was skeptical, but he'd never seen so many adults so terrified and insistent that they were telling the truth. The officer called the police chief, who then radioed state police, the county sheriff's office, and Fort Campbell military base. A news reporter from Kentucky New Era was alerted to the story as well. And here's where the story started to get exaggerated, not by the Sutton family, but by the media. Although the Suttons all said that they had been fighting little silver men, the paper reported it as gray men, which in turn was changed into green men. Combine that with the fact that some of the family described the creatures as goblin-like, and suddenly the Sutton family had been besieged by green goblins.
Right. It's funny how they took a story that was already incredible, and then they changed it into something that it wasn't. I mean,
Right.
I've always heard of it as the Kentucky Green Goblins, and they weren't green,
No.
and they weren't goblins.
No, like this story needed to be exaggerated.
Right. It's
I mean, it
spectacular
was-
enough.
Right. The investigators found a bunch of shell casings and noted all the holes in the window screens and door screens. One officer came across some sort of iridescent sheen on the ground, where Lucky claimed to have shot one of the creatures. Another officer noted the strange glow still coming from the woods, but despite searching, they didn't find any source of the light. The family members were all questioned separately, and they all corroborated the same story. Officers noted that none of the adults had been drinking. They even interviewed the closest neighbors, who said that they had heard the gunshots and they had seen the strange glowing light, but they assumed that the Suttons were out in the woods scaring off a bobcat. Hours had gone by, and since there was no sign of the creatures, the officers and the media just left. The exhausted and stressed out Sutton family and their friends re-entered the house. They all tried to get some sleep, and Glennie tossed and turned for a while, but finally she dozed off. At around 3:30 a.m., she woke up, and there, hovering in her bedside window, its talon-like hands gripping her windowsill, was the creature. Lucky, who was asleep on the living room couch, got up and woke up Billy Ray. The two kept watch with their guns close at hand. Just before daybreak, the aliens or goblins, or whatever you want to call them, just left. The police came back the next day to continue their investigation. They were looking for any evidence of a flying saucer landing, alien footprints, scratch marks off the house, or blood trails, but they didn't find anything. But radio station employee Bud Ledwith got involved, and he interviewed every single member of the family separately, and he remarked that he was incredibly impressed by how similar the accounts were. He also had them draw the little gray men, and he was shocked by how similar their drawings were also. Now, not all the newspapers were accurate with their reporting. Newspapers all over the country ran articles about the Green Goblins of Kentucky, and their stories inflated the number from anywhere to 12 to 15 creatures. Now, remember, the Suttons never described them as green. According to History.com, people showed up in the hundreds, traipsing all over the Sutton farm. Many were looking for their own evidence of aliens, often taking parts of the farm home with them for souvenirs. And not only that, just as many of them actually made fun of the Suttons, asking Glennie if her family liked moonshine or if Lucky had brought monkeys home from the carnival. Angered, of course, Glennie put up no trespassing signs, but they didn't do any good, of course, because people simply ignored the signs and entered the property anyways. Thoroughly annoyed by all the people constantly stopping by, Glennie began charging them in hopes that it would deter them from coming. She would charge 50 cents for entering the property, $1 if they wanted to talk to her, and $10 if they pulled out a camera.
I love that.
Well, you could see where she'd, might as well make a little profit off it.
Right.
But you can see where that might cause problems down the line.
And I'm sure it did.
And the people weren't deterred. They paid up, which later came back to bite the Sutton family, when skeptics said that they were just trying to make some money off a hoax. Eventually, though, J. Allen Hynek of Project Blue Book took interest in the case. He contacted the MPs from Fort Campbell and then quickly dismissed the case, calling it preposterous and equating it to a misidentification and shared hysteria.
Except that none of them were drinking. Like, I could see maybe if they were drinking, but it doesn't seem like Glennie was the type of woman who would fall, who would get caught up in a hysteria kind of moment.
Right. And I love how things are always blamed on shared hysteria.
Right.
Now, what's ironic is that one of the ufologists who took the case seriously was Isabel Davis, who just happened to be affiliated with the Center for UFO Studies, which was founded by Hynek. Her 200-page report, which she filed in 1956, included detailed maps, drawings, and documents, plus summaries of similar accounts from around the world. She also included interviews with both the Sutton family members and police officers who were on scene. Her conclusion was that although there wasn't a lot of physical evidence for what the Suttons had been fighting off, she found zero evidence indicating that it was a hoax. Zero evidence.
Right, because they weren't making it up.
No, they definitely saw something. She also dismissed any suspicions that Lucky and Billy Ray had been sneaking swigs of liquor behind Glennie's back. She also found Glennie to be extremely credible and not someone who welcomed or enjoyed being in the limelight. In 2006, Joe Nickel, who we've talked about before, offered an explanation for the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter. Nickel is the senior research fellow for the Committee of Skeptical Inquiry. His conclusions from the incident are as follows. First, there was a known meteor that streaked across the Kentucky sky that night, on August 21st, 1955. Second, the gray or silver men were simply a small group of horned owls.
Of course they were.
Nickel also pointed out that they do have talons and glowing yellow eyes. They also fly, of course, which would explain the floating the family claimed the creatures were doing.
But what about if you shoot an owl, it's not going to flip over backwards and then run away? Which is what they said the creatures did. Every time they shot one, it would flip over backwards and then run away.
Right. Well, he's trying to justify his theory.
Right.
And lastly, the owl's long wings could be mistaken for arms raised in surrender. The silver color of the goblins' bodies could simply have been the moonlight reflecting off the owl's feathers. Now, in some ways, the horned owl explanation seems to make sense. In fact, it's pretty easy to just accept it as what it really was, until you think about it for a little bit. First, owls are not impervious to bullets. With so many shots fired and direct hits, according to both Lucky and Billy Ray, you'd think the police would have found at least some feathers, if not an entire owl carcass. And if horned owls were protecting a nest of some kind, why would they have climbed all over the roof of the house or clung to the windowsills? Where were the scratch marks they should have left behind? And lastly, how could an entire family of Kentucky natives not recognize that they were fighting off a bunch of owls?
Exactly.
Now, they also never said that they heard any hooting at any time before, during, or after the encounter. And horned owls generally stay within 1.5 miles of their nesting area, implying that the Suttons would have seen one at some time before or after the night of August 21st.
Well, it makes sense if it really was owls, or even the neighbors. The neighbors said they thought that they were off chasing a bobcat when they heard the ruckus. The neighbors didn't say anything about, and, the darn owls that have been around, nobody said anything about owls.
Now, the Sutton family didn't really talk about their encounter much after the pesky alien seekers finally left them alone. In fact, according to countryliving.com, Lucky's daughter Geraldine didn't even know about it until she was 14 years old. A couple showed up at the Suttons' doorstep one afternoon asking to speak to her dad. Turns out they were writing a book about UFOs and they wanted to interview him. Geraldine had no idea what they were talking about. She said in the article, quote, "My daddy didn't like how people treated him once the story got out. People made fun of him. It was traumatizing. Still to this day, the witnesses who are alive are afraid to talk," end quote. Which is why Glennie sold the farmhouse in Kelly and moved into an apartment in the town shortly after the incident, like within 10 days of it. She had had enough and wanted to be around people she knew, not strangers who harassed her and called her a liar. J.C. Sutton, who happened to be Lucky's brother, dealt with all kinds of anxiety and stress after the encounter, making it hard for him to hold down a job. Now, does that sound like people who were part of a hoax?
No, it does not. It sounds like people who experienced something traumatizing and then were called liars.
Yeah, it sounds like he has PTSD.
Right.
In 1969, Geraldine visited the old family farm with her father. And although it had been abandoned for quite some time, he was able to show her the well, and they both came upon a weird circular impression in the grass that Lucky wondered might have been left by a spacecraft.
That's cool.
Now, for the last 10 years or so, Kelly-Hopkinsville has embraced the history of the UFO encounter. Every year, they have a festival, as a way to bring in revenue, calling it the Little Green Men's Day Festival. Yes, the little men were silver, not green. But since the world seems to know the story by that wrong description, they decided to go with it. And Geraldine, well, she's happy to correct the misinformation and to tell the family's real story. It's a pretty incredible one and a little bit terrifying.
I love that story. It's been one of my favorites for a very long time. So I'm glad you shared it because I'm not sure everybody knows about it.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had heard it. I was like, no, wait. Am I reading that wrong? You know, it just seemed too incredible. And then I had heard it on a podcast, and it was a descendant of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about it, and it's like, this just seems so real.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah, you could say that maybe they embellished a little bit, but they definitely saw something.
And it sounds like it was the media that embellished, though. I mean, if the media was saying there was a dozen of these creatures to
Right.
15 of these creatures attacking the house all at once, and
Right.
that's not, according to what you were saying, that's not what the family said. They said it was 3 or 4 at the most.
Right. And here's what gets me. You know, you have these people that have been living in these areas for generations, and they've probably, you know, grew up hunting or farming
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, but they know what kind of species are in their general surroundings.
Right.
And, you know, you get this with like Bigfoot encounters or cryptid encounters or even alien encounters. And people come out and try to say, well, no, this isn't what you saw. You saw something like, maybe you saw a bunny running across the lawn.
Right.
It's like, are you freaking kidding me?
Right.
These people know what they've seen.
Right.
You know, there's no misidentification.
And I keep coming back to, you would think with all the bullets that were flying, that the officers would have found owl feathers.
Yes, of course, especially with a shotgun.
Yeah.
And if you're using buckshot,
Yeah.
I mean, some feathers would have flown.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, it's a great story, and I'm glad that you shared it, because now all the people that may not have heard it now know about it.
That they do.
That they do. So we'll be right back after this quick break. Hey, did you know? Strange things happen during a solar eclipse. First, the temperature drops between 5 and 10 degrees. The wind changes direction. Radio wave frequencies act all funky. No one is really sure why. And animals become really confused, especially cicadas and crickets, who chirp. Cows and horses may even go to bed early, and birds return to their nests. Even microbes are affected. In one study, bacteria in petri dishes shrunk and changed shape. Who'da thunk it?
That is pretty interesting, dear.
I know.
And what's pretty cool is Plattsburgh, New York is in the path of totality come April 8th.
Yes, it is. And they've been saying that the hotels have been booked up for 6 months already,
Right.
with people coming just to see it.
So we're going to have to keep an eye out to see if we notice any changes in the local wildlife.
I saw on the local news website that they're asking people to actually do audio recordings of what the crickets do, because they want to study more closely what sounds the crickets make.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I want to keep an eye on our groundhog. See
Oh,
if it
yeah.
affects him at all.
He'll come out and look around with his little teeth.
He's so cute.
He is cute.
All right. You want to tell everybody what your story is about tonight?
Yes, it's about a boat, and it's a shorter story. It's shorter than yours, but I thought it was really interesting, so that's what I'm going to talk about. In July of 2011, the Wild Goose, a 136-foot yacht, was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The Wild Goose wasn't always a yacht, though. Originally, she was a U.S. Navy minesweeper built in Seattle right next to another minesweeper that became oceanographer Jacques Cousteau's Calypso. I loved Jacques Cousteau when I was a kid. We used to watch all of his specials.
I know.
He was the coolest. But anyway, the Wild Goose was commissioned in 1942, and she took part in World War II. In 1946, she was decommissioned, and her 3 guns were removed, according to megayachtnews.com. Then she was purchased by Harold Jones, who owned the Vancouver Tug and Barge Company. He converted her into a yacht and named her La Beverly. By the late 1950s, her ownership had passed to Seattle-based lumber tycoon Max Wyman, and he renamed her the Wild Goose II. And then, in 1962, a very famous actor by the name of John Wayne purchased her from Wyman for $116,000. Born in Iowa in 1907, Marion Robert Morrison was always accompanied by his favorite dog named Duke. As he walked by the fire station each day on his way to school, a local fireman began calling Marion Little Duke, a nickname that stuck with Marion throughout his life, although no one would use the little for very long. Duke later took the stage name John Wayne, but his friends continued to refer to him as the Duke for the rest of his life. And soon, fans of the movie star called him that too. He starred in 179 movies and TV productions, most often as a cowboy or a war hero.
Well, to be fair, I think if my parents named me Marion as a boy, I would change my name too. Just saying.
Always a fan of the water, Wayne applied to the U.S. Naval Academy, but his grades weren't good enough for him to be accepted. So he enrolled at the University of Southern California with a pre-law major. An avid football player, he played extremely well until a broken collarbone curtailed his professional hopes. He didn't tell his coach that he broke his collarbone while he was body surfing. Due to his injury, he lost his football scholarship and he had to leave school, and that's when he found his way into acting. When World War II began, Wayne tried to enlist, but since he was 34 years old, he was too old. He wrote letters to the president numerous times asking to be allowed to enlist. This didn't make the president of Republic Pictures very happy, and he threatened to sue Wayne if he broke his contract. Wayne went ahead and offered to join the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA, but his offer was declined. Instead, Wayne used his clout as an A-list Hollywood star to tour several U.S. bases during the war to entertain the troops in the South Pacific. It was during this time that the head of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, asked Wayne to do a little digging. They wanted to know if General Douglas MacArthur, who was the commander of the Southwest Pacific Forces, was doing anything the OSS would consider a threat. So he was doing kind of like spy-like work.
That he was.
So Wayne had a long-standing love of the water, and he was extremely patriotic, which all leads to why he loved his new yacht so very much. When John Wayne purchased the Wild Goose II, which was an upgrade from his 76-foot yacht, the Nor'Wester, he dropped the "II" from her name, and she was known then on as just the Wild Goose. He made some upgrades, of course, creating 5 staterooms, including a master stateroom and 2 for his children. The children's staterooms apparently still have the initials EW and AW carved into them, which are the initials of his 2 children. He had murals installed, and he also raised the ceilings since he stood at 6'4". He had a salon built into the yacht, which could seat 127 people and included a fireplace and a wet bar. It also included a koa wood table that was used for poker games with friends like Bob Hope, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Jackie Gleason. The poker table doubled as a dining room table when he was enjoying family time.
Oh, my God. I would have loved to have been there.
I know, because those are some of your, like, Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., like, I know.
Yeah. They're my favorites.
I know. So, although the Wild Goose sounds pretty extravagant, with 5 staterooms and all this stuff, it really wasn't. If you look at pictures of the yacht online, it shows that it was actually really kind of like homey. Like, it was the kind of boat that a family could just feel comfortable in and just enjoy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It sounds like a nice lake house almost.
Exactly. It was like a floating lake house.
Right.
And what I thought was funny was there was a picture of one table with chairs around it. And my family had the exact same chairs in our basement in the 70s. So it was not pretentious.
Right.
Wayne docked the Wild Goose in Newport Beach, California, but often sailed her to Mexico and Alaska. As I'd mentioned before, John Wayne loved the Wild Goose, most importantly because he spent a lot of time on board with his family. There are dozens of interviews online with his children in which they describe water skiing and just all-around good times with their father, including firing a mini cannon from the deck every night at sunset. In several interviews with his family and the former yacht crew, they say that time spent on the Wild Goose were the happiest times of his life. And he loved it so much that in 1965, he purchased a home directly across from where she was docked. According to a YouTube video I watched that was made by his son, Ethan Wayne, called Exploring the Wild Goose, a tour of John Wayne's mighty vessel, the house did have a slip, but when his father docked the Wild Goose, he realized that it was so big that it blocked his neighbor's view of the harbor. So he rented a slip further away from the house so it wouldn't block their view anymore.
That says a lot about him. He was pretty considerate.
It really does. Now, Ethan Wayne also says in the video that when the lots were first being sold on the point where he had built the house, they were just $1,200. And if you bought one during the weekend, they'd give you a second lot for free.
Are you kidding me?
That's what he said.
Wow.
I just thought that was cool. It has nothing to do with anything other than I thought it was cool.
$1,200 now to get a lakefront property.
Mm-hmm.
Starting minimum $500,000.
At least, yeah. So anyway, back to the Wild Goose. John Wayne sold the yacht to Santa Monica attorney Lynn Hutchins shortly before his death in 1979. And this is when the stories about people sensing and hearing and seeing John Wayne's spirit still aboard the Wild Goose began. According to an article in the LA Times, within 4 months of buying the yacht, Hutchins began to see Wayne's apparition reflected back at him in mirrors, and he'd see his face through the portholes. He also saw a figure he believed was Wayne blocking a doorway. He'd hear shuffling as though someone was walking across the deck, and at times he'd hear the sound of beer glasses rattling as if they were being moved. Now, none of this seems scary or disturbing, of course. It's just as if John Wayne was still enjoying the boat that he had loved so much. In 1983, an Atlanta-based psychic named Patricia Hayes held a seance on the Wild Goose. She claimed to have spoken with Wayne and shared that it was her understanding that he isn't always on the yacht, but he does visit from time to time because it's still one of his favorite places. In 1991, Hutchins sold the Wild Goose to the Hornblower Cruises and Events Company. Female passengers who spent some time on the yacht often claim that the bathroom door would lock even though it was unlocked just moments before. One evening, as the captain of another one of the Hornblower's vessels pulled into dock, he noticed that the Wild Goose was lit up as though someone was inside and had turned on several lights. He knew that the yacht was supposed to be locked up and empty, but since it didn't appear as though anyone was actually on board, he assumed maintenance had just accidentally left the lights on. The following morning, when maintenance arrived and expected to find the gate unlocked and all the lights on, they found the total opposite. None of the lights were on and the gate was firmly locked. But one of the strangest stories happened after a Newport Bay fundraiser. Somehow, in the middle of the night, the Wild Goose had slipped its moorings and had drifted across the water, finally stopping in front of John Wayne's former house, where it had once briefly docked decades earlier.
That's eerie.
It is, because when maintenance went to retrieve the boat, they were totally puzzled to find that the yacht itself was totally locked up. Like nobody had jimmied a door or everything was locked up. And there was no way anybody had gotten into the engine room or the steering room, and the mooring ropes had not been cut. They were completely intact.
Oh, interesting.
They weren't frayed. They weren't, it was like it just drifted back to where it felt it belonged. Over the years, other Hornblower employees have reported hearing what sounds like an ice machine being turned on, a sound which they can't explain. One of the chefs claims that he saw a flickering light, almost like a single candle, in the main salon, but there was no one around and no way to explain what he'd seen. And on at least one occasion, a former captain was rumoredly tossed out of Wayne's former bed one night by unseen hands. So, as I said before, none of this seems particularly scary. Like, I'm sure it's unnerving, but it's not threatening in any way. It just seems as though John Wayne's spirit is still attached to his yacht, and it was a yacht that he absolutely adored. And if you look at old footage of him on the Wild Goose during his lifetime, he does always seem to have an expression of pure joy and happiness on his face, like all the old film reels and stuff, like the home movie kind of stuff.
Right.
He always just looked so happy when he was on the boat.
Well, it sounded like he had great times there with his family. I mean, who could ask for more? And then plus hanging out with the Rat Pack and Gleason.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
It must have been a really fun time.
Oh, they were a blast.
A great time. So today, the Wild Goose is still owned by Hornblower Cruises, and you can book all kinds of dining experiences and excursions, including brunch and dinner cruises. The cruises tour the Newport Beach area, and they pass by Wayne's former home. It's not there anymore. Like somebody knocked it down and then built something else, but you can go by where it used to be. The yacht also features movie posters and photographs of the actor, and part of the proceeds from ticket sales go directly to the John Wayne Cancer Foundation.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah. And just as an aside, I thought this was really interesting. So remember when I mentioned in the beginning that John Wayne had traded up from a 60-foot yacht to the Wild Goose?
Yeah.
Okay, so his previous yacht, the Nor'Wester, was also a former military boat, and it was converted into a civilian vessel. So it was built in 1932, and it was used as a patrol boat in World War II. In 2021, the current owners were gearing up to use the Nor'Wester for private charters, and they'd planned on giving 100% of the net proceeds to the John Wayne Cancer Foundation. Well, on April 17th, 2021, right before they were set to offer all these private charters, the Nor'Wester unfortunately hit some rocks near the San Juan Islands between Vancouver Island and the coast of Washington State, and it put a 1-foot gash in her hull, and she sank. So the owners who are responsible for salvaging her immediately tried to raise the $250,000 that it would have cost, and then they were thinking $1.5 million to rebuild it, but they realized that they couldn't. They just couldn't raise the money. So as far as I can tell, the Nor'Wester is still there in the Salish Sea.
Well, that's
It's
sad.
just a wreck. I know, but as I was researching the Wild Goose, I kept coming across all these things saying that John Wayne's yacht had sunk.
Right.
But it wasn't the Wild Goose, it's this other one. So.
Well, I'm sure he had many happy times on that boat as well.
I'm sure. It's a piece of history that's kind of lost, you know?
I'm sure you can probably still dive it.
I'm sure you can. I would think that that's probably what they're doing now,
Right.
and donating the money, part of the money, to the Cancer Foundation. So,
Very cool.
yeah,
I did not know about John Wayne's yacht.
his haunted yacht. I do think they probably had some kick-ass parties on that yacht.
Oh, can you imagine?
Just fun, you know?
Those guys knew how to party. They really did.
We have a photograph of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra
Yeah,
over our bar in the living room.
we do. I mean, they're the Rat Pack. They'll always be cool. It's just timeless with them.
Right. Well, I think the Wild Goose is kind of timeless, too.
I think so.
Yeah,
Well, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode.
I think so.
You want to tell people about our sources?
I was going to. As always, if you would like to know more, you can check our sources in our show notes. It's where we, kind of jumped off to get our information, but there's tons more there that you can read for yourself and, go down that rabbit hole on your own time.
Wow.
I'm going to keep rambling until you cut me off.
No, you can keep on rambling. It's fine with me.
May not.
They'll probably get tired
I was going to
of it,
say.
but I don't get tired of your rambling.
Aw. Thanks, honey.
Well, that said, join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.